Before we started this evening, we drew some numbers from a hat in the order that the candidates will go. And the first person to go this evening will be Cliff Leclerc. So over to you, Cliff.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you, first of all, for coming out. I was rather hoping we'd see a lot more people, but we'll have to do with what we have. It's an important election because there are two of us, and Jersey's in a time when we are having some big issues. You might ask yourself, well, what qualifies you to tackle on some big issues? Who are you? What do you do? I'm a psychotherapist to trade, and companies hire me often to go in and do conflict resolution and team building. So I know all about putting people together who can do things and get results, because I hear a lot of people stand up and say, if I got in the States, I would do this and this. And I think, wait till you get there, because you can't just do it on your own. You need cooperation. Mr. Reed there would know all about that. So you have to get some consensus, and you have to get people to be able to get behind your ideas, okay? So what are my ideas? Well, I'm concerned really about the money. Isn't that usually the burning issue? It seems to me the money is gone, and along with the people who spent it. And we need an income on the island, and our cash cow is finance. So we need to really not only support finance and take it forward to the next level, but also diversify. I'm a big fan of this new digital Jersey thing. The potential is huge. There are companies here now who provide cybersecurity to massive worldwide global companies, and it's a new avenue, a new furrow that we can plough, and we need to go down that way. There are a few things that I put on my manifesto here that I wanted to cover today, and I think number one, alongside the money, is we've been spending it as if, you know, I can remember a politician years ago, I don't remember who, he said, well, we've got money coming out of our ears. And that's now no longer the case. We need the money. And we need to stop spending the money the way we do. You know, there is colossal spends going on here. And on a lot of them are nice to haves, not need to haves. I read a headline the other day about the fantastic airport. And I thought, well, couldn't we spend half the money and just have an airport that works? Why does it have to be a fantasy one? You know, why does it have to be creme de la creme? It just seems arrogant in the extreme to me. And the other issue that is particularly important to me today is that we need to represent ourselves at the highest level with Brexit. As we speak, a lot of money that was destined for Jersey is heading off to Liechtenstein and other locations. So we really need to try and get our act together and make sure that we don't lose out in the changeover. I mean, when we had plenty of money, we were sailing along nicely, and then suddenly we had 0.10 and massive drop in revenue. And yet we carried on spending like we had that revenue coming in. And that's very worrying. You know, one of the things that it really inspired me was when our constable here was giving his retirement speech. He said, I'm leaving the parish in a healthy financial condition and in good order. And I was immediately struck by, well, why don't we feel that about our island? Our island needs to be in good order and well-heeled and sorted out. It's a bit of an embarrassment globally if you're supposed to be financial specialists and you can't manage your own purse. Yeah? The old, nut of housing, you know. I have a plan, it's on my website, I'll put it up there so people can see it, move my name over there, and because it's too long to explain in a couple of minutes. But I have a plan for housing that will bring in cheaper housing, affordable housing. People talk about affordable housing, but they don't talk about how to achieve it. I've got a worked out plan on my website. If you want to know about houses, go there and have a look at it. There's also a very important parish sheltered housing issue here that's been rumbling on for years, and that needs resolution. And it needs resolution that is as fair as possible and equitable to all parties, so we actually get the units for the people who need them without treading on everybody's toes and annoying everybody. I know there's quite a bit of division in the parish about it, and I would like to get stuck into that more and get that resolved with a happy ending. The other thing that's important is to see through the independent care inquiry commitments. We really need to see to that. It's been a stain on Jersey for a long time, and we need to get that cleaned up and sorted out properly. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, over to Richard.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for turning out this evening. I, like Cliff, had hoped there might be more seats filled, but this is also being recorded, so thank you to those who are watching the recording for wanting to take the time to listen to us. A lot of you do know me, or you may know something about me, so I'm not going to spend time telling you too much about myself, and I won't try and cover every issue. I hope you will raise those in questions, but it's been an honour to represent the parish of St. Ouen for the last 3.5 years as deputy. And I think one of the best parts of my job has been to represent parishioners in their dealings with states departments or officialdom, to come alongside them and help them through a problem or help them understand an issue. That one-to-one work, which I've really enjoyed and I hope has helped people, and I hope to have that opportunity to continue helping in that way. But when I first trod the boards in the States Assembly 3.5 years ago, I wanted a job with some responsibility. So I stood for the chairman of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, and other states members put me in that role. And I'm glad I took it, because it's given me a very good understanding of the island and the issues that we face and which are important. And I'll deal with a few of those, but there's so many things I could talk about, but they'll come through in questions, I hope. But one of the issues we looked at on our panel was the gap between the haves and the have-nots in Jersey. And this is far more pronounced than in the UK, for example, and many European countries. And we found that there was a significant portion of our population whose incomes had not just failed to keep pace with inflation, but they'd actually gone into reverse. And if the island is successful, and I don't think I would paint as gloomy a picture as Cliff has, the island is showing signs of recovery. All groups should share in that, and we're at risk if we have a lot of people who are struggling in this island on low incomes. And it's not pensioners. Traditionally, you would have thought pensioners were the groups affected by low incomes, but it's people who are actually working, who are working hard, but still are not earning enough to support themselves because they're in low-paid jobs and their housing costs are huge, probably, and they're in insecure jobs because they might be on zero-hour contracts and such things. Children in those families suffer, and parents do too. Physical and mental health issues arise, and the States has to support those people by income support to top up their costs of living and supplementation of their social security. So there's a lot of cash that goes into supporting these low-income families. So that's why I was pleased that in recent months the States has accelerated the rate of minimum wage. That's going to increase to help these people, but also introduced and encouraged the promotion of the voluntary living wage. Now you might think, well, what is all that to do with St. Ouen's? Because we're a comfortable parish in large part, well off in many cases, but there are families that are struggling still in St. Ouen's, and anyone can lose their job at any time and be put in that sort of situation. And it's right, isn't it, that we don't live in isolation. We're part of the island. And if we can ensure that people are working in better, more secure jobs, that will increase productivity, that will reduce the need to bring in labour from outside, that will reduce the taxpayers' subsidies, and there's more disposable income to be spent in the island. So that's where it matters to St. Ouen's too, because we're all in this together. We're all one island. I just want to say something about health as well, because that is a huge issue in the island. Healthcare generation ago perhaps was all about fighting infectious diseases, but now that's changed. People's health is so much better in many respects, but the problems that are arising come from our lifestyle. I'm rather heavy. And how we live, what we eat. There should be a focus on health promotion, disease prevention and early interventions. So lots more to say, and I hope to answer it in questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, candidates. What I failed to say at the introduction was that whilst the candidates have 3 minutes to answer, 30 seconds before, we'll just give one ding of the bell before they finish. So in the draw that took place before the meeting, Richard will be going first. He drew the number out the hat. So could I have the first question, please? There's a young gentleman there.
So, Gabriel Carter. So, like about a month ago, the Assistant Home Affairs Minister, it was, she recommended to the next Home Affairs Minister that a review of firearms laws be conducted after the election to like reduce the amount of gun-related incidents. So I was just wondering, like, because St. Ouen is a home to quite a few gun owners and a few gun clubs, how you'll kind of protect the rights of like the gun rights of people in St. Ouen.
Thank you, Gabriel. Interesting question. It's true the Home Affairs Minister has spoken about a review of gun laws, but I think the scenario that the laws and any review would be trying to cover would be the risks of any misuse of firearms. And fortunately, we in Jersey have not had too many problems. I remember one in town perhaps a year ago when a firearm was used. But there's not too many illegal and illegally used firearms or incidents of that nature. Jersey has a proud tradition of shooting and a militia tradition, and I would want to ensure that that continues. And the clubs all over the island, including our two very special clubs in the parish, continue as they are, very professionally and in a totally safe way, continuing with their sport, because that's what it is, a sport of shooting and pistol shooting or all that fine. So I see the two as very different. There isn't a conflict between criminality and the sports clubs. Sports clubs are very well regulated. They would want to be, and I'm sure they will continue to be. If that helps, Gabriel. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel, for your interesting question. We live in troubled times. The news has always got some horror story in it. We're very fortunate here that we don't seem to have too much in the way of those things. Problem, as I see it, is the evil is in the person, not in the gun. The gun in and of itself is just an item. You know, people have them above their fireplaces in the old tradition. And you know, if somebody who owns a gun has a mental breakdown, decides to run around and shoot everybody in their area, nothing could be done to stop that. So the only way you could do it is to have nobody have any guns whatsoever, except licensed police force. And that would be really unfair on the very responsible people who use guns. There's a lot of shooting done in Jersey, and the clubs are very strictly run. I've been to them myself, although I'm not a keen shooter, but I've been to them. And I was struck at the time by the amount of discipline and the ranger of the shooting gallery, whatever you call it. And it all seemed very well organized. And the people, I was interested to find that the people who own them had to have special box in their house where it was secured and so on. So I don't think we have, you know, people wandering the streets with sort of gun in the back belt thing going on. And I hope we never do. You know, otherwise we would have to change. At the moment, it's working. Nobody's got hurt. So I would go for the status quo.
Thank you. Could we have another question, please? Peter. Peter Mitchell.
Peter Mitchell, a subject on health. There is an increasing incidence of autism, Asperger's syndrome, gluten allergy, and other things, and they are beginning to be linked to the use of glyphosates and Roundup especially in agriculture. I'd like to know what the candidates feel about this.
Thank you. Richard.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's a very technical and scientific issue, so I can't pretend I've got a formed view on the effects that pesticides, or any one pesticide, might have on conditions. But it's interesting you raised that question because Deputy Kevin Lewis of St Saviour has raised that issue in the States. And it was his intention to bring a proposition, but he's deferred it, hoping he will get re-elected. And I think he will want to discuss it in the States in the near future if he is re-elected. So at that time, I look forward to studying the question. It's not something that just Jersey is facing, I understand, but it's a debate that's going on in the UK and probably all over Europe. So we will try and draw upon the knowledge that's there, and I think our Environment Minister would also want to make sure that Jersey does what is best for its people. If there are issues, if there are risks which might lead to autism or Asperger's, then those should be minimised or eliminated if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, for your important question. I treat people with autism and similar conditions, so I absolutely understand what you're talking about. Contamination goes into the aquifer and eventually into the reservoirs, so we need to be very, very vigilant about what goes in there, and more research needs to be done into it. But we have a department here that really needs to keep on top of this. It's something that I think is really incredibly important, because you can't avoid water. You have to have water, and if you're being poisoned, it needs to stop. You know, we've had 2 reservoirs contaminated recently. I've written fairly extensively on my website about this and about photosynthesis and voltaic heat power that can work as alternatives to these things. It's not necessary to pour chemicals over everything. And I'm sure there's probably somebody in the farming community here would tell me I'm talking nonsense because I'm not a farmer. But I have done the research on it, and there is change happening. And the continued reliance on very strong chemicals needs to be really seriously reined in. That's my view of it. Hope that answered your question.
Can we have another question, please? Lady in the back.
Hi, sorry, Annie Paxton. What are your view on ID cards?
I don't have a particular problem with ID cards. We all carry driving licenses with our photos on. More and more we're asked to produce proof of who we are. It is a proposal of the Council of Ministers in the context of their migration proposals to introduce ID cards so that to help or to meet the challenges of migration, which no doubt we'll talk about. There's sufficient protection now around data and the preservation of our data. The states and all countries in Europe have recently introduced new data protection laws. So I can't see there's a risk that what the Russians might get access to our database. I would like to ask, perhaps, Mrs. Paxton, do you have a specific worry about identity cards? Well, that's right. That's really, I suppose, why I don't see a problem. I don't see it as harking back to the days of the German occupation. We were under the jackboot then. They'll be used for proper purposes if they're introduced this time, seems to me. Thank you.
Annie, is it? Yeah. This is a good one. Some folks hold the view that it's a violation of your personal freedom to be asked to have a card. You know, there is a dark connotation to these things in the minds of some people. Based on what's already been said, you know, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, basically. There is a temptation, if you ever do this, if you ever put yourself up for a candidacy, there's a fear that comes to you that says, if I make a statement about something and the people won't like it, they won't vote for me. So there's a tendency for people to want to avoid the question and duck the question. And I'm not going to. I am in favour of those ID cards. I know the kind of people who are rolling off that ferry at night. You can drive a car from Eastern Europe with a boot full of guns, somebody mentioned guns, and drugs in the back, and there's hardly any check coming off the thing. We have some very dodgy people walking around our town. Now, out here you won't see it because you don't have lots of nightclubs and things like that, so you probably think, what's he talking about? I spend a lot of time in town. I'm very connected with the entertainment business of an evening, and I can tell you there's some very nasty people. You ask any policeman will tell you we're getting increasing amounts of knife-carrying, dodgy people. And so if they've got an ID card, and we know where they've come from, as Richard said, we'll move on to that in immigration, then that's got to add to the safety of the general population. So I'm definitely for it.
Thank you. Can I have another question, please? Gentleman on the back.
Simon Voisin. I'm interested to know what your position is on building in the parish, for example, affordable homes for people getting onto the housing ladder, but just generally, you know, the building in the parish, more homes are needed. What are your positions?
Richard?
Yes, I believe more homes are needed for young families with parish connections, and you might remember that we have recently gone out and asked people to put their names onto a list that we're maintaining here in the parish hall to set out their St. One's connections in the hope that we can do this. And I was very pleased that the present Connétable some months ago asked me to get involved with that work. And I would like to take it forward. The background is that we tried to build some sheltered homes. The planning department eventually, after a long process, said, no, not just sheltered homes, you need to consider all the parish needs. So that is why we're now involving first-time buyer homes as well. It will mean taking some green fields, I guess, because the white zone, the piece that isn't in the green zone, is very limited. There's the Carres farm, but that's a working farm. And there's only some tiny pieces of land, the one opposite the rectory, which I don't think we would want to take for building and is small. So if we do build, I think it should be close to the centre, but it will involve some loss of agricultural land. This was the issue that has been raised in St. Peter's. They have tried, they've been refused on the grounds of loss of agricultural land. I think that's a great shame. Not that you lose agricultural land, but we can't achieve that balance because we do know that there are young families leaving the island because they can't afford to live here. So we do need an affordable homes scheme. I've looked at Cliff's on his website. I can't support it. It would mean a lot of public subsidy. But what St. Peter's were proposing seemed to work. We can go into detail perhaps another time, but I think that's important, but nothing will be done without a full public consultation. I'm sure the new Connétable will ensure that also. So it'll be down to parishioners at the end of the day. It's not the deputies or the constable that say yay or nay. Full public consultation, probably states' decisions, new island plan, all that sort of thing. It's quite a long process, but I think we must move on with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. As you know, there are greenfield sites and there are agricultural sites that are highly productive and some that are not so productive. I'm not the friend of the monster developer who wants to say, well, you know, to the devil with the green zone, let's just plough through and build as many houses. That's absolutely not where I would be coming from. On the other side of it, you know, the parish is not a museum. I mean, if you've got a house and you're happy with it, and your children have got a house and they're happy with it, you look out your window and your view would probably be, I don't want to see any more houses around here. It's beautiful and it's green and let's just leave it as it is. However, if you've got 2 or 3 kids who have no house and they say, Dad, you know, I'm leaving for Australia, you know, you probably won't be able to see your grandchildren very often, but what else can I do? You know, there's nowhere for me to go. Then you probably have a completely different view. So like with all things in life, a compromise needs to be found that is non-injurious as possible. We have an excess population. We have to put them somewhere. And this dovetails very neatly into, you know, the whole immigration thing, which is why we need to stop people pouring in here. Because if you need 1,000 homes and you build 1,000 homes, then you let in 1,000 people, all you've done is used up your land. I hope that answers your question.
Could I have another question, please? Yes, lady in the back.
Hi, Carolyn Romrell. I just want to know what are your views on the states continuing with the electoral reform.
Richard?
Electoral reform. The states have battled with this for 40 plus years. I think one question is settled, and is that the constables should remain in the states. And I support that. The constables are the bedrock, they are community leaders, and they bring a good dose of common sense and wisdom to the states. So the constables will always be there for the foreseeable future to represent the parish. The question then is, do all deputies have to be parish representatives? And in the rural parishes, we do very well. If you think of a small parish like St Mary's and St John's, and then the ones along the north coast, we've got good representation in the states because we've got a constable and a deputy. Per head of population, we do well. If you go to St Helier, they've got 1 constable and 10 deputies. So it's a very unequal picture, especially when compared with, say, St Mary's or St John's. Now, is that fair? It's good for us in St One's, but do we stick with what we like in St One's, or should we ensure that we have fair representation across the island? And in fact, our electoral system is such that we do break international conventions. So there are these sort of international norms and agreements that say in an electoral system you should try and have 1 member representing a certain number of people and be consistent. Now, we're way out of kilter when you compare St Mary's and St Helier. And that can't be good. Is that a reason why, perhaps, our voting figures are so low? Because people in St Helier feel disenfranchised? So I would not, I'm going to make myself unpopular, perhaps. I would not see a problem with moving to larger electoral districts so that you in St One's could perhaps vote for 5 deputies, together with St Peter's and St Brillard's, or we could share with St Mary's, St John's, a larger district. So you would gain deputies. Think about it.
Carolyn, thank you. This is definitely an old chestnut, this one, isn't it? But a good one, you know. When I talk to people in the course of my day, they say, what do you want to stand for the states for? They don't listen to anybody anyway. And when you tell them something's wrong, they don't do anything about it. And in part, that must very much seem true to people. However, behind the scenes is an issue, and the issue is we moved to ministerial government, which in my view has been a failure. And the rest of the people in the states are virtually disempowered. So you've got a handful of people who call in the shots and say, we're going to do this, this, and this. And the other people either can't get the information they need or they're railroaded out of it. So the actual population are not properly represented. So definitely there needs to be a change in the method that we had. I don't want to drone on about committee systems because people, you know, say, oh no, not that again. But the truth of the matter is, you had consensus and real democracy with the committee because there were people, there'd be a farmer, an engineer, somebody else. So something came up, you'd have that broader input. At the moment, one person can go and throw it out. Whereas a committee would say, just a minute, maybe you haven't heard all the sides of the story here. So for me, a streamlined version of the old committee system would be far more representative and far more democratic. So yes, to answer you, I am in favour of changing the system because look what we've got. Thank you.
Do we have another question, please?
Fiona Spalla. The states have been talking about and advocating talking therapies for people. I'd like to know the candidate's view on what happens if you have somebody with mental health issues that either chooses not to speak or is unable to speak.
Can I just repeat that question back to you? What happens if somebody chooses not to speak or is unable to speak and they're seeking mental health therapy? Is that right? If they are unable to speak or choose not to speak. As a mere St. Juan's deputy, would I... Gosh, I do find that difficult. I'm sorry, Fiona. I would hope that there must be somebody within mental health services who could give guidance on a question like that. Now, this is presumably an issue you've come across, that somebody's not receiving help. Well, we need to ensure that person receives help. Sometimes we need to draw in help from the UK. Jersey's a small place, and people with a very particular issue, sometimes we don't have the staff here to deal with it. So we do not need to draw on expertise from the UK. If your question relates to should we employ somebody here to engage, I suppose that depends on the extent of the problem. So if it's a problem that covers many people, then we should look at employing somebody here. If it's a problem that might affect one or two, then let's see if we can draw on expertise from the UK. I think without knowing more, I'm sorry, that's all I can say at the moment. Thank you.
Slightly unfair in my favour, given I do this for a living. Somebody who's in, a depressed catatonic state or has been traumatised and can't or won't speak needs a specialist therapist who specialise in that. And the way things work generally in most populations is, if you have 20 or 30 people who need that facility and service, then probably somebody will be hired to do it. And in our case, we'd have to probably import somebody or train somebody. If it's one person, it might be better if that person was paid for to go and see a trauma specialist. There's a lot in Northern Ireland. When I was training as a psychotherapist, I worked with a lot of Vietnam and Cambodia, war-torn people who are very seriously traumatized, and shutting off is a way of a person retreating to protect themselves. But they can be what we used to call thawed out with time and patience, and I've seen it done. I've been there and watched it. It absolutely will work for most people, but it takes time and somebody with the specific knowledge for your person. If it's something that affects you particularly, please see me afterwards and I could give you some information.
Can we have another question, please? Frankie.
Frankie Frary, representing the older members of the parish. some time ago, there was a case of if you needed something done in the sheltered housing, you'd ring up that wonderful man, Michael Paddock, because he came straight round and sorted it out for you before he was constable. But there is no guardian of the sheltered housing, as far as I know at the moment, who could actually go in on every person, make sure they were well that day. Is there a plan to employ one or not?
I don't believe there's a plan at the moment to re-employ somebody, but this can always be looked at again. And Frankie, if you want to raise it with whoever's elected and the new Connétable, then we can look at it. All praise to our community who live in our homes for the elderly. They are a wonderful crowd of people who do look after themselves in that they look after each other. And I know the parish hall staff keep a close eye on them too. If you employ somebody, and that might well be desirable, but we have to deal also with safeguarding issues and training issues, that may well be appropriate to do so. And I think we could look at that issue again because, as we've alluded to, there is this proposal to build more sheltered accommodation using the money very generously left by the late Beryl Coulter. And that will be part of the plans linked with affordable housing developments too, which we would want to consult upon. So if we can achieve that, then there'll be yet more units, and hopefully within them a facility such as a meeting place where physiotherapy or other activities could be conducted. And it may be that we would need somebody dedicated to a role specific to the homes for the elderly. Thank you, Frankie.
Thank you for your question. There always needs to be a linchpin for people who need access to other areas and services, and it might be that there's a part-time position for somebody. If successful, I'm going to make sure my telephone numbers, emails, and the website stays up so people can contact me. If they've got any issues, I undertake to research them and give you an answer. I will add to this. I've spoken to many state members over the years and left a message, no answer, no comeback, nothing. Lots and lots of that goes on out there. And I undertake, because, I have a bit more sympathy for a senator because he's got island-wide people clawing at him, but in a parish this size, I undertake to answer all questions and see to their resolution. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes, so, yes.
As one who has lived in the sheltered accommodation for nearly 13 years, I'd like to say that I think at the moment we don't need anybody to look after us. We've got the parish hall there. They're always available. I've rung Alison in the evening and she's come round with her husband when I had an electricity failure. And I found the warden coming round a nuisance because she rang the bell every day. And I told her not to come in the end, and I would call her.
Another question, please. Yes, Mr. Battrick.
Paul Battrick. We've spoken a lot about island-wide mandates and what you want to do for the island, but is there one project that you'd like to undertake for the parish within your term of office?
Yes, I really would like to ensure that we can build those affordable homes and that sheltered accommodation. That's my view, so I have to accept that it's up to the parish at the end of the day, but I feel that there's a need there and I'd like to achieve that. Am I allowed to? Because there's something else I would really love to see, which is an extension of mains water and mains drains to parts of the parish. They seem to have stopped 20 years ago. And they are parts of the parish which really are in dire need. And it's, in this day and age, it's appalling that a civilized society is still pouring its waste into holes in the ground just above a reservoir. There is some movement. Money has been the problem, finding enough, but I've been talking with departmental officers and ministers. There is perhaps some capacity to move forward step by step with some improvements. So I'd like to see that some extension of those water or sewage networks. Thank you.
Gosh, food for thought. Richard's right. You need good water, and you need it to have it managed. And I couldn't help but think, you know, in this day and age, we need to have these things done. There has been a dragging of the feet, and while I was thinking about Paul's question, I thought of, and I'm not diversifying here, except to say that, you know, we've just spent £25 million for a hospital and there's not one stone laid. That would sort off an awful lot of water problems out, you know. I'm going to have to copycat Richard here. I think the sheltered housing is an absolute must. It's in my manifesto, and I think the affordable homes and how to do them is vital. There's another thing. It's not a bricks and mortar issue. Unity. I'm a big believer in feeling a part of something and unity. And I've been picking up quite a little bit of dissent as I've been going around the parish. There's sort of warring teams here, warring teams there. And given what I do for a living, I'd like to do something to make sure that everybody who lives in our community not only feels a part of it, but feels that they belong. And that might seem a bit wishy-washy to somebody, but to me that's very important because community is us. Thank you.
Have another question, please. Gentleman at the back.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roy Travitt. Bearing in mind our state's expenditure and that we are now £700 million in debt, and we spent £2 million on consultants, we spent £25 million looking at developing a hospital that doesn't have one brick in the ground yet. What will the candidates do to stop the prolific squandering of public money going out of the parish, because everybody in this parish pays rates, everybody in the parish pays taxes if they're contributing into the system. And as a taxpayer, I would like to see that my taxes are spent appropriately in the right places and are not squandered, and that the parish here benefits not some consultant that's being brought in from the UK, not £25 million that could have gone to sheltered housing and first-time buyer homes in this parish. And I would like to know how the candidates are going to stop the squandering of taxpayers' money. Thank you very much.
First of all, to Mr. Travitt, I don't recognise the figure of 700 million, I think, in debt, he said. So the island has borrowed money to fund Andium Homes, and Andium Homes has a project, a long-term project, to build social housing for the island. And then there is a proposal, well, yes, the states have agreed to borrow more money towards the hospital, towards building a hospital. So both capital projects. So in the same way we might, as individuals, borrow money to build or to buy a house and pay it back over the long term because we are investing, this is a function of government. This is what governments all over the world do. I think the problem arises if we borrow money to meet our day-to-day needs. That's when issues arise, and we've seen that in the UK, where they haven't been raising enough tax and they've been spending more than they raise in tax. But the island spends within its income raised by tax, and those borrowings have been for particular capital projects. How to control it? There is better control than perhaps there was. Projects have come in on budget or under budget, such as the police station, successfully built under budget, and the energy from waste plant also. There is better discipline now, and we are seeing a change within the public sector. Mr. Charlie Parker has come in with his reforming wizards, and instead of departments being very independent and working, it is said, in silos, it's a catchphrase of the States Assembly, Mr. Parker, with all his experience in Westminster, wants to sort of hold the line centrally and ensure that we keep to agreed plans and not overspend. So we can only wish him well in all his determination to do that. I think he will bring a dose of good discipline to the States and good working. Thank you.
30 seconds, Richard, if you wanted to.
Another?
You have still got 30 seconds.
Have I?
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Oh, is that the 30 seconds?
Yeah, that's sorry. Yes.
Oh, right. So, see, sorry. Telling a politician that you can go on some more. How wonderful. No, so I think more importantly is a talk about how we raise our taxes. Because so much more tax is raised from personal taxpayers than used to be when companies were paying tax. We need to find a way of ensuring that we get in corporate taxation. The retail tax was a recent example of this, asking the biggest 20 retail operations in the island to pay something towards their costs. Oh, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your question. One word, vigilance. We've been used to people palming us off with excuses. And that nauseating phrase, oh, well, lessons will be learned. You know, millions of pounds disappear into the ether in somebody's pockets, and they say, oh, well, too bad, you know, so plenty more. It's the wrong attitude. The attitude is wrong, and the attitude comes from the top, and it goes right down through the civil service. We've had examples of people swanning off on holiday to play golf, first class, staying in five-star hotels. Yeah, and that attitude permeates down to people. People see other people do that, and they go, oh, well, it must be okay for me to spend the money. Yeah? And the easiest thing in the world to spend somebody else's money. So, you know, some of these projects, they're not being monitored properly. Scrutiny doesn't have the teeth that it needs very often, and this is part of why we need to restructure the way we do things, so as people have a proper say. I mean, I can remember when the incinerator was an issue coming up, yeah? It was going to cost 400 million, ended up being $500 million, yeah? There's a system in Sweden, I researched it at the time, that would be no bigger than 2 bungalows, would have fitted in Bellasan. It works like a huge welding arc, 2,500 degrees C. Doesn't leave any fly ash whatsoever, and the solidified waste are pebbles of glass, which they then mix and put in the road surfaces, like, you know, like granite chippings. 52 million, the whole thing. And the chap in Sweden who was in charge of their one there, which they've had for a few years, he said, it'll drown whatever needs you've got there. And he said, you really should go for this. He said, what they're going for there is a dinosaur. I put a report together with Dr. Dick Van Steenis, who died, bless his heart, who was an air pollution specialist, particularly on the 2.5 microbe, which is what comes out of incinerators. Your body can't deal with them. It's like asbestos. One person, one minister, wouldn't even look into it, wouldn't research it, wouldn't entertain it. 52 million, 500 million, 52 million for a better product. We need to be on the case of that and not be too polite about it either. And I'm telling you this, if you do elect me, I've got teeth and I won't be letting them get away with it.
Another question, please. Sorry. Oh, lady there, yes. Yes, you there? It's all right, the microphone's just coming.
Sorry. Oh, okay, thanks. Can I just talk without it? Well, people won't hear you. Okay. What do you think about reintroducing work permits to protect, to keep the population down, and also to protect unskilled work that perhaps disabled people could do, and people with learning difficulties, and people with autism?
Yeah.
Yes, this is part of the migration debate that the states will have soon after the states resumes. Work permits are one part of the proposal, and I think I would support that because 1,500 people came into the island, no more than that, but there was a net increase of 1,500 in each year in recent years, which is too much if we continue in that vein. Work permits is one solution. It is suggested that we will grant workers a license to come in for 3 or 4 years, but not 5, because once they've reached 5 years, then they can stay and move into other jobs reserved for longer-term residents, and they can have access to all the island's benefits and generally settle here. So we can try and do that. It would be a control. It would have some drawbacks. It would mean we might not attract the right staff that we want because some people will say, well, if I haven't got a chance of settling in that place, why go? So we might not get the right people that we need, but I think it's worth trying. There are also practical issues that arise. I mean, so what happens if you're here 3 years and you meet the love of your life and marry her? Have you got to go? Or if you have children, have you got to take them away when your 3 years is up? So all these issues have to be worked forward, but I think we do have to do something about migration. And everyone is saying that, and you know, politicians will say this wonderful word, we've got to achieve this balance, but I'm afraid there's no other way of expressing it. We can't reduce the population without causing a great deal of harm to the economy and ultimately to our circumstances. We can't really have a policy of one out and one in, because if we do, those who are remaining here get older, and we need a good, strong working population to maintain the costs of the care, health care as we get older, and which are only going to increase. So the costs of caring are increasing, and the numbers of people that will need care, because we're in the fortunate position that we all live longer. But once we get past the age of 85, very often, our care costs, in terms of the island costs, increase dramatically for that population. Thank you.
Work permits, yes, I'm in favour of them. Thank you for your question. We can't keep putting a pot that is only designed to take a half pint, fill it up with a pint. We just can't keep doing it. Some of you will be familiar with these figures, but maybe others not. If we continue to import people at the rate we're doing, we're going to need 200 high-rise blocks to put them in. Right? I hear people getting very twitchy out here about one green field. And they're right. So, you know, when people say these things, at the current rate, 200 high-rise buildings, you know, try that on for size. And you can do this in microcosm. You know, if a new person moves into your house next week, and then a new one the week after, and another new one the week after, you're not being able to get to the bathroom or park your car or do anything, are you? And you'd soon be going, no, I don't want any more people in my house. And we really need to not shy away from this. You know, charity begins at home. I'm not against, you know, being horrible about people's rights or you know, trying to put down the workers that we need for our various industries, particularly farming. But in your own life, if you've tried something that worked, and then you try something else and it didn't work, you usually go back to what worked, and work permits worked.
Have we got another question, please? I'm sure somebody must be itching to ask a question here. Yes, young man again.
I'm interested about what the candidates think about like if Reform Jersey turns out to be like any kind of significant force after the election, how they'll work or not with Reform Jersey, and if they'll advance or try to obstruct their agenda.
Yes, it will be interesting to see how Reform Jersey fare. Every state's member would have a duty to work with them, as we have a duty to work together. There may be, it may be the case that party politics is coming in Jersey. So Reform, we can see, have certainly got themselves organised, and they've got a very well-presented, consistent manifesto. And I've found Reform Jersey have, in many respects, some good ideas. And we have seen over the years, some of their proposals which they put forward years ago have now been adopted by the states as something the island wants to do. Sometimes I don't agree with the way they go about things or the way they express themselves, so I couldn't share their party approach very often, but we have a duty to work together. And I think it may be helpful to get the island talking about policies more and to create political parties for that purpose. But it's got to grow from the ground roots up. You know, I don't think it's any good a few politicians getting together and saying, I'm a party. If you, the electorate, want parties, if you want to get together and say, we want to work on this area of policy and create something that's good for the island, it's got to be based amongst the people. But I see nothing wrong in party politics if it's conducted sensibly. I don't like the idea of people being forced to vote against their conscience. I'd hope that would never happen. So I don't see in Jersey you'd have those sort of strict party whips as you might see in Westminster, but I certainly see groupings of people coming together and presenting themselves as a group that would work together and give themselves a name, whatever they choose. I think it's coming. Thank you.
Sir Philip Balash said in his parting shot that he thought party politics was the way forward and that our current system of government was unwieldy, cumbersome and off-putting to the electorate. His words, not mine. Reform are a group of people who are part of an evolutionary process. And yes, there are some mavericks among them, and I wouldn't necessarily want to, agree with everything they say and do. But whenever something isn't working well, you're going to get some people who say, well, just a minute, that's not right. You know, it's just not happening right. So we are coming forward to say we want to see some change. Quite a few of them will probably fall by the wayside, but there seems to be a motion forward that they're taking. And, you know, there is a resistance to change in all human beings. We don't like anything new. Something new goes along, it's like, ooh, it must be bad, these guys coming here with their fast ideas, maybe we should just shun them, and stop all that nonsense. But, a lot of that is fear-based, and a lot of that is, an unwillingness to have a look at something new that may actually contain some good. We're going to have to work with these people. They will be a force. You're quite right, Gabriel. There would definitely be a few of them get in because they've put so many people forward, But they're not all rascals, and I don't think they're looking to destroy. Just one or two of them have got some very destructive streaks in them, but you're going to get those people in any group that goes for change. I forgot to mention one thing, and it's slightly detract, Gabriel, so I do apologise, but as I've been going around talking to people in the parish, I've been amazed how many people have said to me, what is your stance on the church? And I sat in there the other day and I looked at it and I thought, a bit like our hall here, there's a certain patina to it. Those pews of, they're ancestral pews. Changing it would mean people would have to worship in the wrong way, that they're facing the wrong way, they're not used to it. I've been quite educated about it. I'm not actually a churchgoer myself, I have to say. But I've found it illuminating, and people are pretty vexed and revved up about it. And so as I sat in there, I thought, what would you do? And I looked at it from the outside, and I took some photos, and I thought it would be sacrilege for this to change. So I just mentioned that in passing, because it seems a highly emotive issue, and I don't think those people's opinion should be left out, and I'm glad I remembered it before we finished. Thank you.
Do we have another question, please?
So would you mind if I ask another one?
Yes, please. Please do.
Thank you very much. St Wands is not isolated in its need to use a hospital. And we've had £25 million spent with no results so far. And I would like to know the candidates' views on the debacle that has been the siting of our hospital, the cost of our hospital, and where they think that the hospital should actually be. Because everybody in St Wands at some point is going to need access to the new facilities once they are built. Thank you very much.
Richard.
So I think there's a few questions encompassed in that. I wonder, Mr. Conatable, if you could give us an extra minute or so, each of us. Thank you. So, yes, on the scrutiny panel, we've been looking at the hospital plans over the last 3 years, and I've learnt a great deal. It's been very interesting. The truth is there are many sites on which you could build a hospital. And everybody has thoughts on what would make a good site. But how many of us have ever built a hospital? And there is a means of assessing each site, weighing up its downsides and its benefits, which is used certainly in the UK and probably wider. So the UK has got extensive experience of building hospital. There are government procedures that have been followed in Jersey to assess what you need when you build a hospital. And they've looked at various sites, including all the ones that are out there. And each site was assessed in this way, according to these guidelines, and was given a numerical score. And the ones that scored the most were People's Park. Well, we know that's out the window because people didn't want to build in People's Park. That's accepted. The Waterfront was another site that scored highly, and the existing site. But notice they're all in town. And nobody has ever said that our present hospital is in the wrong location. It makes sense to me that you place a hospital where the main population centre is, and where most people travel to. All roads in Jersey lead to town. That's where we need a hospital. Most people who work at the hospital live in town. You have 800 staff members who go there between 8 and 9 in the morning, and most of them live in town and walk to that. Imagine if we had it in St Saviour and we had to get all those staff up there in the morning and back again in the evening. So I'm convinced that a town location is the right location. The Waterfront, you could have built a hospital there. It would be big. We're talking about a big building. So we know the sort of structures we've been unhappy with on the Waterfront. This would be big. But it could be placed there. But the thing is, the Waterfront was undeliverable because politicians could not agree upon it. It's not zoned for hospital use, it's zoned for residential use. It would need to take Jardin de la Mer, which the St Helier deputies have said they would fight over in the same way they fought over People's Park, because the town representatives don't want to lose an inch of public space in town. They feel they're very deprived of public space, which they certainly are. So they won't give up Jardin de la Mer, which means the site is even more constrained and will have to be tall. But the planning inspector says, no, you can't have a tall building. So Waterfront was just unfortunately undeliverable. We go back to the present site, and what has been proposed is a phased approach so that existing hospital procedures and operations would continue whilst building goes on, first of all, along the Kensington Place side. And then so you're not mixing hospital activities with a building site. It's carefully managed. And this happens in big cities in the UK. So there is worry about noise and disturbance and vibration. And I think the only thing I would want to be sure of if I was re-elected was to make sure that the existing hospital could continue without undue noise or disturbance. And that might mean going to visit Guy's Hospital or the other big centres where they have conducted big developments of a new hospital right next to a working hospital. Modern construction techniques, that can be done, we are assured, but I would just like to verify that. So that's my take. Money, 25 million spent, 6 million of that has actually been spent on new facilities up at Overdale, enhancing that. And the rest is, it's all detailed, it's known, a lot of it has gone on consultants, but we are building a new hospital. We're not building a bungalow. This is something very specialised, and we need help from the experts on how to do it.
Beans, that was a big question, Richard. I gave you 5 minutes.
You did. Thank you, Michael.
Cliff.
It's no wonder you're well loved in a parish, Constable. Yeah, some bungalow. You know, vast amounts of money seem to disappear without much in the way of a result. And so far, 14 million in consultants' fees. Yeah? Can you really believe that? Can you really think that's okay? You know, because I don't see that being right at all. I spoke to an architect, and he's an eminent architect on the island, and I said, well, what is your opinion, Roy? And he said, Warwick Farm, it wouldn't have to be high-rise, and starting with a blank sheet, you'd save 150 million straight away. What kind of people can't, you know, see the need to save 150 million? Are we so well off that we can say, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, just put it down there anyway, you know? It's a massive site. I've looked at them all. And it would work, it would fit. Yes, there is some traffic problems because Queen's Road. Show me somewhere where there aren't traffic problems. Look at the parking around the hospital. Have you ever tried to get to the hospital and visit anybody? I mean, it's a nightmare, you know? So for me, I don't think it's been properly thought through. I think a lot of people have done very, very well so far out of it and not a good result. That's my take on it.
Do we have another question, please? I'm sure that somebody here would like to ask the candidates. No? Oh, hang on. Can we just give you the...
Oops. What would you do to help people that have had life-changing injuries? Yeah, sorry, my name's Fiona, and I'd like to know what you would do to readdress the balance of those people that are isolated and left at home. Some trying to get work, some giving up trying to get work, some having had such terrible time with human beings that they don't even want anything to do with them because they think it will cause them more problems. What would you do to readdress people that are isolated in groups like that, to either facilitate them getting work that's supported or improve their lives?
Richard.
Well, first of all, on an individual level, that should be part of the role of the deputy. If there's somebody in the parish who's feeling isolated, needs help to get work, or to get engaged with states departments, the deputy should be there offering that help, and I would always like to help somebody in that position. But on a wider picture, the question of social isolation is something that we mustn't ignore as an island, because we are talking about, as people get older, we want them to live independently in the community. And that's the impetus now of health policy. But sometimes that means that they become less engaged. If mobility gets difficult, if they can't easily get to the shops, if they can't get to their friends, or if there's perhaps a beginning of an onset of dementia, those people might be reluctant to move away from their home, and they'll cut links with friends. And social isolation is something we must guard against, because it's all very well saying we need to live in our community, but we mustn't just park people and forget about them. So there's all sorts of things that can be done, I hope. So the community support team that is doing great work in St. Owen's at the moment. We've got 30 plus, well no, we haven't got 30 volunteers, but we're approaching 30 volunteers. They have come alongside people in that situation once or twice, and they are there to help. But the parish must try and be aware of those people. We must try, and if they need engaging with all the support groups in the parish, the various clubs and that, we must try and ensure that. If it's somebody younger who still wants to work, Social Security do run good back-to-work schemes. And they are working well. Yeah, okay. But it's always an individual. It's trying to address those individual issues. Perhaps they're medical issues to deal with as well. Obviously, whatever support is out there must be made available to those people. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Somebody's isolated, that leads to depression. Depression leads to medication. They feel more and more alienated. It's a terrible thing. I really do understand it. We do have community outreach teams, and there are things like Oakfield Industries, but of course they don't suit everybody, you know. I had a young man brought to me recently by his mum and dad, and he has Tourette's. If you've ever been around anybody with Tourette's, it's a fairly frisky condition. And they said, you know, he's just sitting around the house playing on computer, driving us crazy. What can you do? I said, well, I can't fix it. I said, but, you know, maybe you could get some work. They said, nobody will employ him. So I work a lot with big companies. So I phoned this company and I said to them, look, I've got a volunteer. He's got Tourette's. He's a bit loud once in a while. But he's great with computers. Would you have him come as a volunteer? Just as a goodwill gesture. And it's a lovely guy who runs the company. He said, yeah, okay. He said, I've asked the team, and they said, yeah, we'll give it a try. If it becomes intrusive, we'll have to give it up, but we'll give it a try. I'm happy to tell you, because he's got these skills and that mindset for computers, 2 months in being there, they gave him a little job. Now, he doesn't earn the same as everybody else, because there are times when he just can't turn up, and there's all sorts of times that he's just not with it, you know. But when he is with it, he's good. And I couldn't help but thinking, when his dad spoke to me, I thought, well, how far out of reach could it be for the people who are supposed to do this job for us, Social Security and health, to take out an advert once in a while in the paper, ask them for company, say, have you got anybody who's got special needs that you could accommodate, either on a paid or volunteer basis? Because to feel a part of is terribly important, like I spoke about earlier, you know. If your life is working well and you've got plenty of money, well, you can't see the problem. Never miss the water till the well runs dry. But for some people, life is desperate for them. I know, because I see them and I hear them. And while you can't cater to the exact needs of every single person, we have an obligation to try and to keep those people inclusive. This lady here, bless her, in red, I didn't catch your name, she got fed up with somebody knocking on the door making sure she was okay. That's infinitely better than living in a high-rise and being dead for 3 weeks before you're found. Thanks very much.
Do we have another question, please? Yes, lady over there.
Kath Bohan. I'm thinking about the homes for youngsters. Now, I look around here and I see very few youngsters in this hall tonight. How would you go about engaging youngsters to come to these meetings and to go to the voting polls?
You're absolutely right, Kath. Congratulations to our youngster here, Gabriel. Thank you for coming along. And I remember 3 years ago there was a young lady who also came along at just age 16 and asked a question. How brave of her. Engaging with our younger generation. I find it difficult, I must admit. I don't know a lot in the parish. And, you know, we are quite a dormitory parish. The people I meet as I go around the parish tend to be my age. I suppose younger people are out in town working. And their children at school, of course. But, sorry, let me think. There's something that flitted through my mind and I've just... yes, we were talking about political parties. Now, I wonder if that is part of the answer, because Reform Jersey have captured some of the interest from younger people. Of course, their use of social media has helped that. They have got a heavy presence on social media, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and the like. We haven't as a parish, have we? Not, the parish has got a website, but we don't engage on social media. I've got a Facebook page, and I'm hoping to engage some more. I'm trying to put some posts up. But I can't say it's going to be terribly attractive to younger people. I'd like to make it so. I need some training, perhaps. We do need to engage youngsters, and I must admit, I'd want to hear from everyone as to how we can get youngsters caring about the island, the place they live in, and perhaps it's more an issue. They won't engage with run-of-the-mill politics, but they will engage with issues. So when we had a debate on Plemore here in this hall, it was filled, it was crowded out, and there were a lot of young people who cared for preserving that site. And I think that's the way youngsters perhaps approach things more. They're not so much worried about the 3-yearly run of constables and deputies elections, but when an issue comes that is vital and important to them, they will engage. And we've got to find a way of bringing important issues to them.
Thank you for your question. If you want to catch some ormers, you've got to go where the ormers are, and you have to go to where the people are. The young gentleman who nominated me here last week, Joe Davis, runs a surf school down at St. Wands. I mean, my interest and passion for surfing has been with me all my life, so I know a lot of people, a lot of young people, and I've organised a lot of competitions that we've had here that have included bringing some world champions over. The reason they were well attended by the people they were for was because there was something there for them. A lot of young people here don't vote because they don't think that we're listening. They don't vote because they're not really interested, and they don't think there's anything here for them. I spoke to a young lady, Louise, recently. She's at Nottingham Trent, and she wants to be a doctor. She's taking an internship in Canada. So bye-bye, Louise, you know. The young in the island do feel a massive disconnect. And the only way to reach these people, it seems, is either go where they are, or you've got to get au fait with Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. I can't remember them all because I don't do it. But I know that's where they inhabit. You know, they all walk around doing this all day long, and they seem to live their life through their telephones. But, you know, if you want to engage them, you've got to go where they are. And I think that a lot of work needs to be done to re-engage the youth of the island so that they actually feel that they are stakeholders. Because at the moment, they think we don't care. And so a lot of them are drifting away and not connected. In the same way as a lot of poor people. I know a lot of people don't like that word for some reason I find baffling. So a lot of poor people feel very disconnected here because they don't feel that they have a stake in where they live. They feel they've just been kind of left to drift to the side and, well, that doesn't matter, you know. Well, it does matter, and I'm going to come back to that theme. You know, if we chose themes for elections, on my banner, which I don't have up anywhere at the moment, but I will have soon, I would put unity because you have to feel a sense of belonging. You know, I build teams in companies, and I see people with a silo mentality. I'm not talking to him. I haven't spoken to him for 2 years. This one doesn't want to sit next to that one. You know, you can knock their heads together when you go in these places. But once you get them involved in the team building thing, and it's like putting crumbs out for the birds, you've got to put something down for them to come. Once they realise there's something in it for them, and they can gain by being part of a team, by being part of something bigger than who they are, that's when you get engagement. And a team can achieve miles, miles more than any isolated individual can. I hope that answers your question.
Do you have another question, please? Gentleman in the back.
Simon Voisin again. I've got two questions. They're sort of related. The role of the dual role of the bailiff is to be debated. I'd asked both candidates how you would vote for that and why. And also, you've talked about, alluded to, Mr. Renouf, I think you've alluded to super constituencies, larger constituencies, but less of. How would you vote, both Mr. Leclerc and Mr. Renouf, how would you vote for the reduction of the number of states members going forward?
Richard?
Okay, role of the bailiff. I'm going to upset traditionalists, and that's difficult in St. One, but it's a question I have thought of carefully. I have to say, it's not the most pressing issue facing the states. I'd be quite happy if the bailiff continued, and all bailiffs have discharged their duties very professionally and very well as presidents of the states. But with the system of ministerial government that we have, I think it is important that we develop a sense of a parliament, the states of Jersey being the island's representative parliament, holding the ministers to account. The ministers act as government, and they must be challenged in a parliament. And that's democracy all over the world. The difficulty has been in the states of Jersey that sometimes we all want to be in government, we all want to be part of decision-making, and we all get involved in that melee, and there isn't that sense that we are also a parliament where those who are not in government hold government to account and hold them to their promises and delivery of policies. And we must step up to that as a parliament, and I feel that if the states elected its own speaker, it would have an enhanced role in doing that. It's not because I don't believe the bailiff can't do it, he certainly can't, but the bailiff is a judge, and he's trained as a judge. And the bailiff can easily move into the judicial role, and we can have a new role as a Speaker of the States, whose duty it will be to promote the States Assembly as a parliament holding government to account. That's my view. That's probably the way I would vote if it comes again. And the second part of the question was about reduction in numbers. I do worry about going too far with the reduction in numbers, because you do need sufficient people to man scrutiny panels and the other committees. So we have 11 ministers, 10 assistant ministers, that makes 21. So you need more than that number to act as the counterbalance. Otherwise, the government, the ministers, can simply have their own way all the time. You need a good number who are there to challenge them, and if they've got things wrong, to outvote them. So you can reduce the numbers of ministers, perhaps. But actually, we're more than we are a sovereign parliament in so many ways. We deal with things from, where to put a pedestrian crossing to international sanctions against North Korea. There's lots that comes before the states and lots of work to do. And I do worry about reducing numbers too far. 44 has been suggested, and perhaps that might be the very limit, because you do need people to do the work. And so then the question comes, elect the right people to do the work. I feel I've got a good track record. I feel I've built a good reputation in the last 3 years. I hope you'll consider me the right person to do the work. Thank you.
Being there was 2 parts to that question, I've allowed 4 minutes for you to answer that. So, okay.
Thank you. The separation of powers has been a contentious and burning issue for a long time. It's one of those things, isn't it? You know, if you get a good guy, then everybody's happy. So it's dependent on the person again. And the trouble is, people think there's no smoke without fire. And that problem is if you remove the doubt, then you remove the problem. Now, I know it's been traditionally the case that, you know, we've had the bailiff, but I'm wondering if it hasn't sort of outgrown its time. I think even he thinks, you know, the time has probably come. Because it's been divisive, and it's rolled on, and it's caused more and more division. It still rolls on. There's people saying, no, it shouldn't be like that. No. So it's taken up too much time. Never mind anything else. So I think if you remove the questionable issue, then the problem dies. The problem stops. And so, you know, as much as I like some traditions, I think that one has run its course, and I think we would all be collectively a bit more engaged if we thought it didn't look like, you know, there was any leanings one way or the other. I'm not saying there is, but if people think there is, then they tend to emotionally respond accordingly. So I hope that kind of clears that one up. You know, I wouldn't lose any sleep over the bailiff not continuing. I have to nail my colours to the mast on that one. And as for the number of people in the States, I think it takes as many people as it takes to do the job. And I think it's more important of how the job is done. Because if you've only got a small, like I said before, I don't want to repeat myself, but if you've got a small group of very powerful people who are calling all the shots and the other people are kind of semi-redundant, well then yes, it does look like you've got too many people. But if you let those people engage and let them have their say and be a part of the actual process that comes from outcome, not just one guy or one lady, could be, then you're going to get a much healthier blend. I do it in offices. Again, I'm repeating myself, I suppose, because you must have everybody have a say and feel that they're important and part of it. Otherwise, they just disengage and say, well, I mean, I spoke to one politician who shall remain nameless, and I said, you didn't even have the file of the paper that was being debated that day opened on your desk. You had it there closed, sealed in its bit of paper. He said, what is the point? They won't listen to me. And I went, you know what? That is no good. That means the system is actually pretty badly broken and needs to be reset up if somebody's saying that. So that's my answer.
Do we have another question? I think, did I see an arm go up here before? Did you want to ask another question? Is it the, sorry? Oh, he's answered us. Okay, fine. Do we have any other questions, please? Okay, I'm minded that we're closing up to 9 o'clock now. I would just like to state one thing. Cliff, you sneaked in a question, referenced the church, the recent proposals to the church for an answer to that. I'd like to give Richard the opportunity to respond if you wish to make some comments on that. You spoke for 1 minute 10 seconds on that one, so I don't know if you wish to make any comment, Richard, on that.
That's very fair. It seems to me the vote has been taken. That's a decision, and whatever will happen to the church can only happen with the agreement of everyone in the parish. So that was the purpose of that meeting, to see if there was agreement. There isn't agreement on those plans, so those plans can't go forward. But our new Connotab has said in a public meeting held here that he would want to explore, you would want to explore, I think, what needs to be done. So perhaps, I don't know, there are issues perhaps of disabled access and toilets and facilities for children and safeguarding children. Those are issues which I don't think any organisation can escape from and must be looked at in the parish context. So I think our new Connostab will want to see what can be done, but whatever comes forward, if anything, will need the agreement of the parish. And that's a good safeguard. It is a parish building. It is the most beautiful, ancient, historic building in the parish. We all love it and we want to see the best is done with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've had 15 questions tonight, and I hope you've found it informative. I think both candidates have done extremely well. It's not easy being up here doing this, so perhaps we could give them a round of applause.